Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a closer look at one of the most iconic objects in Norse mythology, Thor's hammer, Mjölnir.
Yeah, it's a pretty recognizable symbol.
Right, you see it everywhere nowadays. But we're going to go beyond the pop culture image and see what we can learn from historical texts and archaeological finds.
Exactly. There's a lot more to Mjolnir than meets the eye.
So let's start with the basics. Who is Thor in the Norse pantheon?
Well, he's usually seen as this powerful god associated with, thunder, lightning, storms, basically the forces of nature that inspire both awe and fear.
Okay, so he's the god of big, powerful stuff. And his hammer, Mjolnir, is kind of an extension of that, right?
Absolutely. It's like the ultimate symbol of his power. Even the name itself, Mjolnir, is pretty interesting. There's a lot of debate about where it comes from. Some scholars think it means lightning maker.
Oh, that makes sense, given what Thor is known for.
Right. Others say it could mean shining lightning weapon, or even have a connection to words for grinder.
Grinder. What would that mean in this context?
Well, it could be referencing Mjolnir's role in shaping the world, bringing order out of chaos, that kind of thing.
I like that. There's this creative, almost blacksmith-like aspect to it.
Yeah, there's a lot packed into that one word.
You mentioned historical texts earlier. Can you give us some examples of those?
Sure, we have collections of poetry and prose, the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda. They're full of these amazing stories about Thor and his exploits.
And what role does Mjolnir play in those stories?
Oh, it's central to pretty much everything Thor does. It's his weapon, obviously, but it's also used for all sorts of other things.
Like what?
Well, in one story, Thor's hammer actually gets stolen by a giant.
Wait, seriously? A giant steals Thor's hammer?
Yep. And to get it back, Thor has to dress up as a bride.
Okay, that's hilarious.
Right. It's from the Shrimskvidi, which is part of the Poetic Edda.
So even in these ancient stories, they had a sense of humor.
Definitely. But the story also shows how important Mjolnir was to Thor. He was willing to do anything to get it back.
It was more than just a weapon then.
Exactly. And you see that in other stories, too. Mjolnir is used to consecrate things, bless marriages, even resurrect Thor's goats.
Wait, he could bring his goats back to life with his hammer?
According to the myths, yeah.
That's pretty amazing. So it sounds like Mjolnir was essential for both combat and more ritualistic, symbolic actions.
Absolutely. It was like this multi-purpose tool imbued with incredible power.
But we're talking about myths here. Do we have any evidence that people actually believed in these powers?
Oh, we do. We have archaeological evidence.
Like what?
Well, pendant in the shape of Mjolnir were incredibly popular during the Viking Age.
Really? So people were wearing Thor's hammer around their necks?
Yep. And we find these pendants all over Scandinavia and even further afield, too.
So it wasn't just a local belief then?
Seems like it was pretty widespread.
I wonder what it meant for people to wear those pendants.
That's a good question. Maybe it was a way to invoke Thor's protection or to connect with his strength. We can't know for sure. But what's really interesting is that a lot of these Mjolnir pendants have been found in women's graves.
Really? Women were wearing them too?
Yep. Which raises some intriguing questions about gender roles and societal beliefs during the Viking Age.
Yeah, that's not what you'd typically expect, given that Mjolnir is a weapon. It makes you think it represented something more than just brute force.
It definitely does.
And it's not just the pendants. There are also these things called Thor's hammer rings.
Oh, yeah. Those are cool. They're these iron rings with multiple amulets attached, and a lot of them are shaped like Mjolnir.
So it's like they were creating these powerful charms combining different symbols for protection.
Exactly. And again, many of these rings have been found in women's graves.
It paints a more complex picture of Thor and his hammer than you might expect, doesn't it? Like he wasn't just this god of destruction, but also a figure of protection and security.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
But we've been talking about the physical representations of Mjolnir. What about its deeper meaning, the symbolic side?
That's where things get really interesting because Mjolnir wasn't just about physical power. It was also connected to rituals, blessings, even healing.
So there was a spiritual dimension to it as well.
Definitely. And that's where we get into some pretty fascinating territory because some scholars believe Mjolnir is connected to another powerful symbol, the swastika.
The swastika?
Yeah,
Really?
I know. It's not something you'd typically associate with Thor.
Yeah, that symbol has a very different connotation today.
Absolutely. But in ancient Germanic cultures, the swastika often appears on artifacts alongside images of Mjolnir, even replacing it sometimes.
So what does that mean?
Well, some scholars think they both represented a similar concept. Thor's power, maybe as a force of nature or cosmic order.
That's fascinating. It shows how the meaning of symbols can change so drastically over time.
It really does.
And it makes you wonder, why Mjolnir continues to fascinate people even today.
That's a great question. Why do you think that is?
It's hard to say. Maybe it's because, like, Mjolnir represents something we all kind of wish we had. You know, a source of strength, a way to protect ourselves when things get tough.
I think there's something to that. It's like this idea of carrying a little piece of invincibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe it's more about, the idea of having that kind of power, but using it responsibly.
That's a good point.
Like not abusing it, but using it to help others.
Yeah, being worthy of wielding that kind of power.
Exactly. And it's interesting how those themes, strength and responsibility, they still resonate with us today.
For sure. We're still drawn to stories about heroes, right? People who stand up for what's right, who use their strengths to protect others.
Absolutely. It's like a universal archetype.
Whether it's a superhero in a comic book or Thor in Norse mythology, it's the same idea.
Right. It's about using power for good. And I think that's part of what makes Mjolnir so enduring. It's more than just a weapon. It's a symbol of that ideal.
Okay, so we've talked about the myths, the archaeology. Are there any other sources that give us insights into Mjolnir?
Oh, yeah. We have some interesting accounts from Christian writers who were looking at Norse beliefs from an outsider's perspective.
Okay, like who?
Well, there's Adam of Bremen. He was a German historian who wrote about the history of the Archbishopric of Hamburg-Bremen in the 11th century. He talks about this grand temple at Uppsala. And in this temple, he describes this statue of Thor.
A statue of Thor.
And get this, Thor is sitting on a triple throne.
A triple throne.
Yeah, like he's this super important figure. And on either side of him are statues of Odin and Freyr.
So the big three of the Norse gods.
Exactly. And Adam of Bremen even compares Thor to the Roman god Jupiter.
Jupiter, the king of the gods.
Yep. Emphasizing Thor's connection to the sky, weather, fertility.
It sounds like they were trying to make sense of Thor in terms they understood.
I think that's a big part of it, trying to fit these Norse gods into their existing framework of beliefs.
What about other writers?
Well, there's Saxo Grammaticus, a Danish historian.
Okay. What did he have to say?
He wrote about Thor, too. But he describes him using a club made of oak.
A club, not a hammer.
Right. Which is interesting because it kind of goes back to that question of what Mjolnir actually was.
Yeah, there's been debate about whether it was more like a hammer or a club.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that Saxo, like some of the Norse myths, mentions this club having a short handle.
A short handle, why is that important?
Well, some scholars think it reinforces this idea of Mjolnir being primarily for defense.
Defense.
Yeah, like protecting the gods and humanity from, chaos and threats.
Okay.
A short handle would make it less effective for throwing.
Right.
Right.
That makes sense.
So maybe it suggests that its power was meant to be wielded up close and personal, like in direct confrontation with evil.
So it's not about launching attacks from afar, but about standing your ground and fighting.
Exactly.
It really ties into that whole idea of Thor as a protector.
Right. And we see that in the stories about Thor battling giants and monsters, like using his might to defend Asgard and Midgard.
Asgard and Midgard, the realm of the gods and the realm of humans.
Yep. There's this one epic story in the Prose Edda about Thor's journey to Jotunheimer.
Jotunheimer, the land of the giants.
Exactly. And he goes up against this giant named Hrungnir.
Hrungnir.
Yeah, and their clash is pretty intense.
I bet.
Hrungnir challenges Thor to a duel, and guess what he uses as a weapon?
I don't know, another giant club.
No, a giant whetstone.
A whetstone, like for sharpening blades.
Yep. A massive one, of course.
Okay, that's an interesting choice.
Right. So Thor hurls Mjolnir at Hrungnir, shattering the whetstone mid-flight.
Wow.
One piece of the whetstone falls to Earth, and according to the myth, that's where all whetstones come from.
Even in defeat, the giant's weapon has a legacy.
Right. But meanwhile, Mjolnir keeps going and slams into Hrungnir's skull, smashing it to pieces.
Talk about a powerful hammer.
But it wasn't a clean victory for Thor, because the other half of that shattered whetstone, it lodges itself in his head.
Ouch. Even Thor isn't invincible.
Nope. Even with Mjolnir, he can get hurt. Which I think makes him a bit more relatable,
Totally. He's this powerful god, but he's not immune to pain and suffering.
Exactly. And the story also highlights another cool aspect of Mjolnir. It always returns to Thor's hand.
Oh yeah, that's right. no matter how far he throws it.
like a magical boomerang of divine power.
That's pretty awesome.
It's no wonder he was such a formidable opponent. But there's another story where Thor actually goes on a journey without his hammer.
Without Mjölnir, why would he do that?
Well, he ventures to the court of this giant king named Gerirr.
Gary.
Yeah. And for some reason, there are different versions of the story. He either forgets to bring Mjolnir or he gets tricked into going without it.
So he's kind of vulnerable without his hammer?
Exactly. But he gets help from this giantess named Greer.
A giantess helps Thor.
Mm-hmm. She warns him about the dangers at Gerirr's court and gives him a magical staff to use as a temporary replacement for Mjolnir.
A magical staff. Interesting. So Thor is resourceful, even when he's out of his element.
Totally. He
Yeah.
can adapt to the situation, and he actually does pretty well with that staff. It's a good reminder that Thor's strength isn't just about Mjolnir, you know? He's a skilled warrior even without it.
He's got his own innate strength and cunning.
Exactly. But speaking of Mjolnir, I'm curious, do we know how it was made?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Like, who forged this incredible hammer?
Well, according to the Prose Edda, it was made by two dwarf brothers, Eitri and Brokkr.
Dwarves made Mjolnir.
Yep. And it's a pretty cool story. It starts with Loki, the trickster god, making a bet with Brokkr.
Loki's always up to something.
Right. So Loki challenges Brokkr's brother, Eitri, to create objects that are more magnificent than those made by these other master smiths.
So it's like a crafting competition.
Exactly.
I love it.
So Eitri gets to work, and Loki, being Loki, tries to sabotage him. He turns himself into a fly and tries to distract the dwarf while he's working.
Sneaky.
But despite Loki's meddling, Eitri manages to create 3 amazing things. A golden boar with bristles that glow in the dark, a ring that multiplies itself, and finally, Mjolnir.
Wow. Those are some impressive creations.
Right. But because of Loki's interference, there was a slight problem with Mjolnir.
What was that?
The handle turned out shorter than intended.
Ah, the famous short handle.
Exactly. But even with that flaw, the gods decided that Mjolnir was the most valuable treasure. Its power and symbolism outweighed any imperfection.
Even legendary objects aren't always flawless.
Totally. And it kind of makes you think about, like, what truly makes something valuable.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so we've covered a lot about Mjolnir. It's more than just a hammer.
It really is.
It's a symbol of strength, protection, even vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. And it's tied to all these ideas about the cosmos, the power of the gods, the struggle against chaos.
It's amazing how these ancient symbols and stories still resonate with us today.
Right. I mean, think about it. Mjolnir pops up everywhere. In movies, comic books, even jewelry.
It's true. It's like it speaks to something deep within us.
It really does make you wonder, what is it about this symbol that continues to fascinate people after all this time?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's a tough one, right? It's almost like Mjolnir taps into something, I don't know, primal, like a longing for strength.
Yeah, like this desire to be powerful, to be able to protect ourselves and the people we care about.
Exactly. Or maybe it's that idea of wielding power, but, not letting it corrupt you.
Yeah, that's a big one. Using your strength for good, not just for yourself.
Right. Like Thor could have easily used Mjolnir to just like dominate everyone, but he didn't.
He chose to be a protector, not a tyrant.
Exactly. And I think that's something we admire, right? Even today.
Absolutely. That idea of, I don't know, noble strength. It's a powerful concept.
It really is. It's like no matter how much the world changes, there's something about that archetype that still resonates with us.
Like we're still drawn to those stories.
Yeah, we want to believe that, good can triumph over evil, that there are people out there who are willing to fight for what's right.
And that maybe, just maybe, we can be like that too.
Exactly.
It's inspiring, in a way.
Definitely. And I think that's, one of the things that makes exploring these myths so rewarding.
Yeah.
It's not just about the stories themselves. It's about what they tell us about ourselves, about what we value, what we aspire to.
And it's a reminder that these stories, even though they're ancient, they still have something to teach us today.
Absolutely.
So, wow, we've really gone in depth on Mjolnir today.
We have. It's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, we've looked at the myths, the history, the archaeology. We even talked about the swastika, which I never expected to come up in a conversation about Thor's hammer.
I know, right? It just goes to show these symbols and stories, they have a way of surprising us.
They really do. And it just makes you appreciate how complex and layered Norse mythology really is.
For sure. It's not just about these simple, straightforward tales of gods and monsters. There's so much depth there.
And it's a reminder that these stories, they've been passed down for centuries for a reason. They continue to speak to something fundamental in the human experience.
Yeah. They're about power, yes, but also about responsibility, about courage, about facing our fears.
And ultimately, they're about hope.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Hope that even in a world full of chaos and darkness, there's still good to be found, and that even the smallest of us can make a difference.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the real power of Mjölnir.
What do you mean?
It's not just about physical strength, it's about the strength we find within ourselves to face the challenges that come our way.
That's a powerful thought.
It is, and it's one that I think we can all carry with us.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Thor's hammer, Mjölnir. It's been an incredible journey, and I hope you've learned something new along the way.
It's been a pleasure. And as always, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that sense of wonder alive.